Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. This is one of the latest articles in the Progressive magazine. Left-leaning and progressive publications have already given Trump the win. Former and future President Trump, and hit subscribe to this channel right now. I've told you, we'll get the win on immunity, presidential and constitutional immunity. He was allowed to perform a speech. He did not compel or tell anyone or convince anyone to commit crimes. This is completely absurd. I'm also telling you that the hush money guilty verdict is highly unconstitutional. A state cannot level a federal charge at anyone without the federal government and without a specific federal statute involved. The Department of Justice and the FEC dropped the hush money case. There's a constitutional dilemma pertaining to jurisdiction. A state does not have the authority or the power to level a federal statute without the federal government, in this case the FEC and IRS, involved. There was no IRS or FEC statute leveled at Trump by the Department of Justice. A state cannot unilaterally decide to do so. Just like I told you, in a 9-0 unanimous decision, a state cannot prevent a presidential candidate from being on the ballot in 50 states. Hit subscribe right now, ladies and gentlemen, to my super chat. Thank you to the members on this channel. Thank you so very much. To my viewers around the world in the Philippines, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Nigeria, Korea, everywhere. Thank you so very much. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Let's get started. And let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to get a huge, huge, huge legal victory, constitutional victory on immunity. And I'm not just telling you that. You have the great Professor Alan Dershowitz saying the exact same thing.
Did take that issue up. How do you see the arguments falling in that case?
Well, as you know, I predicted the outcome of this case exactly, how the court would decide 9-0 using the fifth section of the 14th Amendment. On the issue of immunity, I'm going to make a prediction here, too. I think both sides argue too broadly. I think Trump was wrong to have his lawyers say that if a president orders the SEALs to kill each first, that went too far. The answer should have been, of course not. Now let me explain. But I also think the lower court went way too far by having no immunity whatsoever and saying that whatever a president may have had immunity while in office, he loses that once he leaves office. I hope and I suspect that the court granted cert in this case in order to come out with a nuanced decision that focuses on precisely what are presidential acts. And if they're within the scope of presidential acts, then they have to go beyond the presidency itself. Let me give you an example. President Eisenhower in 1954 sends troops down to implement Brown versus Board of Education. One of the children or one of the police officers is killed. And the new president coming in, a Democrat, years later, wants to indict Eisenhower for having done that, even though it was in his presidential authority. I think we would all agree that there has to be some immunity, and we would all agree that he can't have total immunity for everything he did as a politician or as an individual. So I think the Supreme Court, hopefully, will come out with a nuanced decision that will give guidance to the lower courts as to when immunity is applicable, when it's not applicable. We can bring the country together on this issue as well, instead of simply having extreme views on both sides.
So this is why, ladies and gentlemen, you have Democrats, liberals, people to the left saying that Trump has already won. They did not, and Trump's legal team never said that he could eliminate political opponents. What they said was he has to be impeached, and there has to be some kind of formal proceeding. But even that, look, if he ordered the end of any political opponent, that would be a blatant crime. What Democrats did with the hush money is they elevated misdemeanors into felonies because of a non-existent FEC statute that we still don't know. That is unconstitutional. What they did with the special counsel is they said, well, he defrauded the U.S. He he told lies about the returns or the results, and he tried to impede congressional moment in history. None of this is true. He didn't order anyone to commit a crime. The Federal Bureau of Investigation found that there was no evidence of any concerted effort to do anything by Trump other than a speech. He's protected. He's allowed to contest results in a speech. He's allowed to voice his discontent and to try to paint him as having told people to commit crimes when he said categorically, go peacefully. He is absurd. It's an absurd, stupid leap of logic. But Democrats make those types of leaps of logic all the time. They're trying to imprison Trump on obscure, broad, and vague legal statutes that do not correlate to specific, easy-to-understand crimes. That's why he's won, because the Supreme Court is going to take this back to lower courts to try to find out what did this man do that was beyond his scope of authority. A president can speak to congressional leaders, to loyalists in any state. A president can perform a speech. A president can contest results. He can do all the things that Trump did. That's why they waited 3 years, 4 years. He did not commit any specific crime. They went after Trump not because of servers or of a laptop or specific crimes. They went after Trump with broad, vague, ambiguous claims. Let's continue.
You know, I actually concur with what you just said, and I think, Greg, what Professor Dershowitz is saying is that the argument of absolute immunity probably is too broad.
The case is pretty much a huge victory for Trump. You're going to see why in a second. I mean, they've already essentially given him immunity. The fact it's taking so long is in Trump's favor anyway. He's going to get a constitutional victory, but even if he doesn't, which he will, it's taken so long they can't do the trial before November anyway, which is he'll dissolve the special counsel. He already has the time to dissolve the special counsel when he becomes president because it's taken so long for the Supreme Court to decide on this case. They've already decided, but it's taken so long to officially come out with, yes, he has presidential constitutional immunity, at least partial, and that's a huge victory for Trump.
And a more nuanced judgment of the court, I think, would probably be more appropriate in this case, and maybe even the better argument for the court. Your take?
Well, I think the Supreme Court looked at the circuit court decision and said, hey, you went way too far. You're dismissing any notion of immunity, even if a president acts consistent with his duties. That is absurd logically. And it's inconsistent, by the way, and this is the important part, with the Supreme Court precedent 4 decades ago that a president does have absolute immunity from civil lawsuits as long as his actions fall within the outer perimeter of his official acts. Well,
that's the Nixon v. Fitzgerald case.
You know, Sean, the exact same reasoning applies to criminal prosecutions. If it's otherwise, my goodness, the chilling effect on presidential decision-making would trigger paralysis. Instead of a chief executive, so, America Greg, would be ruled by a committee of lawyers. They'd be afraid to do anything out of fear of future prosecution.
Greg, let me ask you this. Would a more nuanced version versus the argument of absolute immunity maybe be, of course, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building? Would that be, would there be an analogy there?
Yes.
And you would expect the court to do that.
And Jordan said this as well. I suspect the current justices will extend the existing immunity standard in civil actions to criminal cases and then remand the Trump case back to the trial court to decide whether Trump's acts are covered as official acts.
That's why, ladies and gentlemen, they say Trump has already won his immunity case. This is in the Progressive magazine, okay? Also, you have in the Washington Post today something along the lines of something's fishy. The court is taking so long. Democrats feel it's their divine right to imprison Trump on broad, ambiguous, vague legal statutes. And in the hush money case, no legal statute at all. Let's continue. He already has a huge victory with overturning the Colorado ban, a huge, enormous victory with the constitutional presidential immunity, and when it gets to the Supreme Court, 100% certainty, and it might even be before the Supreme Court, the absurd, unconstitutional hush money case without a federal statute, an imaginary, invisible federal statute completely unconstitutional, will be overturned. The hush money case was already dropped by the federal government. That means the state cannot level a federal crime at Trump. I've been talking about this forever. By the way, did I not tell you Hillary, Madam Secretary, will replace mashed potato brains? Have I not said that 5 billion times the past, I don't even know, 4 or 5 years?
All right, let's bring in Greg Jarrett, Fox News legal analyst, to weigh in on this. Hey, Greg, what are your thoughts? What's your reaction?
Well, presidents already have immunity from civil lawsuits as long as their actions fall within the outer perimeter of official duties. That was a decision by the High Court 4 decades ago, and it's quite possible, I think, that the justices will extend that civil immunity protection to criminal prosecutions because the exact same reasoning applies. If there was no immunity, the chilling effect on presidential decision makings would trigger paralysis. America would be ruled by a committee of lawyers. So if the Supreme Court does grant, let's call it immunity with conditions, then they'd have to remand Trump's case back to the trial court to decide whether those conditions have been met. Another possibility here is the High Court will say, well, there should be some immunity for presidents. We'll give you a little bit of guidance, but we're sending it to the lower court to figure it out. The Supreme Court has done that in numerous cases. But either way, the process will be time-consuming, briefs, court hearings, a further appeal. So it would seem impossible that a trial could take place before the election.
Couple of things, Greg. So they'll hear the arguments, but they're also setting up precedent for the future. And we know that there is some immunity, as you mentioned, but will they get into specific arguments about Donald Trump in particular, January 6th, what he said, documents back to Mar-a-Lago took while he was still president technically? Or will this be a general talk about what is too far? If, for example, a president does an Aaron Burr and shoots Alexander Hamilton, had he not been vice president, that will never, you'll never be immune from that. That's extreme behavior.
Yeah, I suspect that they will not get into the Trump case because the Supreme Court, when they took this case, framed the question very broadly, whether presidents should enjoy some form of immunity. So, I tend to think they don't want to get into the nitty gritty of the Trump case itself, even though that's the reason it was brought to the High Court.
All right. When you lawyers often talk about the outer perimeter of presidential action, official duties, what is it? Where is the line of the outer perimeter?
Well, it's very subjective. The fact is this arose back, I believe it was 1982. Nixon had already left office, but he'd been sued by a guy by the name of Fitzgerald. And the Supreme Court eventually took the case, and they said, look, there's got to be some protection for presidents. Otherwise, they won't be able to do their job. They'll be defending themselves in a myriad of civil lawsuits over every decision they make that affects any individual. As I say, the same sort of reasoning applies to criminal cases. What I worry about is, a president who has to make a very immediate and important national security decision, let's say take out a like that when he's protecting America's national security interests. I don't think anybody would say so.
Probably
so
the best.
There's got to be some immunity here.
Probably the best example of that, of course, is when President Obama used a drone to take out a 16-year-old American citizen in Yemen. Basically, what we're talking about here is the one branch of the government either limiting or basically eliminating another branch of government.
The Democrats, what they're trying to do with Trump is use their sensibilities, what they believe or think Trump did, and infuse these sensibilities into the law. The problem is that the Democratic Party's view of Trump is full of absurd leaps of logic. So Trump, he had a speech, and therefore he told people to commit crimes. Wrong. Trump was no longer president when he contested results. Wrong. Trump committed a campaign finance violation. Wrong. He could have paid Stormy with his own money, his own pocketbook, according to Hans A. von Spakovsky, Bradley Smith, Trey Traynor. These are all Federal Election Commission chairmen. The FEC itself dropped the case. Okay, on the other hand, Trump did not have servers with top secret intelligence on them illegally transferred, which is what Clinton had. And by the way, now they're talking about Hillary replacing mashed potato brains. So there you go. I've been telling you that for the longest time. And I think that's what they're going to do. I can't imagine. I've been telling you, Hillary Clinton's going to be opposite Trump. This has been a 7-year meltdown and temper tantrum. Anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it eliminating, but defining restrictions about what you can and cannot do in terms of bringing a criminal action. And of course, it's propitious now because there's 4 indictments criminally against Donald Trump, which many critics, myself included, believe were politically motivated to interfere in the upcoming election. It's classic lawfare, the
Greg, it's
weaponization of the law.
Everybody knows it's just a coincidence.
Purposes.
Greg, it's just a coincidence. You're such a conspiracy person.
Greg, really quickly before we let you go, we want to talk about the New York case because the hush money.
So Democrats already know that their quest to imprison Trump is not going to happen. It's not going to happen with the New York verdict. It's not going to happen with the special counsel January speech indictment. It's not going to happen with the classified data. Democrats made a mockery of the classified data. Okay, Trump was a president with the power to declassify. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden were not. End of story, end of debate. That's it. There's no debate after that. Okay, there's just no debate. He had the power to declassify. You have to prove he didn't declassify. They say, oh, he had all of these, AOC and others. Oh, he was hoarding classified data. He was a president with the power to declassify. There's already judge rulings that Bill Clinton had classified data next to his underwear in a sock drawer. Those were ruled as his private belongings. They were classified data on tapes. He was writing a book. Okay, he had the power to declassify Trump. Other presidents have taken classified data with them, declassified the classified data. Clinton had servers for 4 years. If Trump had servers, see, I wouldn't vote for the Democrats, the candidates the Democrats have nominated. If Trump had private servers with top secret intelligence, and if Trump had cheated, whatever, Marco Rubio or DeSantis or whatever, in a primary that was aimed only at nominating Trump, I wouldn't vote for Trump. But Democrats have no problem with any of that, with Bernie Sanders getting completely railroaded in a primary and elevating Clinton. They have no problem with any of it. Private servers. Could you imagine if Trump had private servers? They would have accused him of giving launch codes via email to every adversary. But Clinton deletes 30,000 emails and then has top secret intelligence on servers. It's illegal to transfer. It's not even it's not even possible from a cybersecurity perspective. And the entire planet almost certainly hacked into the servers. Then what Biden did is even probably worse. Clinton probably had tacit approval from Obama's administration. What Biden did was, decades of classified data possibly at a university, in his garage, possibly, according to Ted Cruz, Hunter, summarizing classified data to facilitate business deals. I mean, this is pure fantasy. What you read, like in the New York Times and the Washington Post, is pure fantasy. When Democrats have done infinitely worse than anything Trump has been accused of. But let's continue. He's already won, people. I've been telling you this. That's why the channel is growing.
Up to that and did that, and I'm going to use a complicated phrase.
This is Matthew Whitaker, former Attorney General, talking about the fact that Trump does have presidential immunity, just like Greg Jarrett and Alan Dershowitz said.
Here from an old Supreme Court decision dealing with Richard Nixon. Did that fall, quote, within the parameter of his duties? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think what he did is most likely did fall within his duties. But the challenge that the Supreme Court's going to have today is there's been no fact finding. So other than the papers that have, sort of been alleged, the court has no facts. The trial court has no facts. And so I think one of the most likely outcomes is the Supreme Court sends this back to Judge Chutkan to try to get some factual basis so they can make this decision. But that Nixon case, there's a Clinton case, but there's no criminal extent of this case. And one thing I would point, David, remember the hullabaloo around if he ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent? That's not the hypothetical they're going to hear today. They're going to say, what if he orders SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a terrorist? Can he be held liable in the court of international criminal? And so that's a more interesting scenario. And that's why I think he's going to get a lot of benefit of the doubt on the immunity question.
Right. By the way, Trump lawyers didn't bring that up. It was the judge with a very hypothetical case. And the answer was not as.
See, Democrats view their accusations of Trump the same as if he committed an actual crime that was easy to understand and a blatant, overt, terrible crime trying to take out a political opponent or whatever. So they're like, well, is he immune to everything? It's like, no, just because you've accused Trump of things he didn't do, that doesn't mean he's immune to everything, Democrats.
The media responded. The answer was very carefully phrased. But very quickly, if the Supreme Court sends it back to the courts, does that delay this trial until after the election?
Yeah, I think there's little likelihood at this point that this case or any of the other cases, except for the current trial, are going to, make this November deadline. But that being said, Jack Smith really wants.
So none of it, the classified data case, the Georgia case has completely been dismantled. I mean, my God, like beyond belief. The only and the DC case, the only case that has somewhat hurt Trump's poll numbers only momentarily is the guilty verdict. But see, that's because people don't really understand. A state cannot level a federal statute at anyone without the federal government involved. The federal government was not involved. It's unconstitutional. It's so blatantly unconstitutional. And everyone who understands the case through the lenses of just looking at it, not this liberal democratic sensibility that says, well, you know what, it was completely the same people who say mashed potato brains, our president is just fine and there's nothing wrong, are the same people who say it's purely above the rule of law. And there was zero bias. It's like, okay, yeah, it's obviously purely biased against Trump. Trump's going to win, very likely in a landslide. And what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to say, I think Hillary Clinton's going to replace Biden. Have I not said that 10 million times? And the same communists, leftists, socialists, whatever, Democrats, they're all going to vote for Hillary again. I know these people. I used to be on the left my whole life up until 6-7 years ago.
Hearing today in the D.C. Circuit Court, his attorney, one of his attorneys, Alina Habba, joins me now. Alina, good to have you with us. Welcome. Always great to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you, Martha.
So tell me a little bit about the immunity argument that was made in the court today. We saw the president come out. We heard from him that he believes that he has complete immunity. And yet some of the questions that we heard from the three judge panel, I should say, were surrounding whether or not that is an absolute situation, because they brought up a number of different instances and asked, would that provide immunity for a president? In other words, if it has to do with an election and arguing an election, does that fall under the immunity that we've seen prior presidents get for national security actions that they have taken? And the word that we've gotten from attorneys watching this is that they are not sure this D.C. court is going to go along with the argument that in this situation, the former president is immune. What was your takeaway from what you heard in there today?
I've argued presidential immunity, Martha, ad nauseum, because I represent the most targeted former president in American history. I can tell you right now, absolute immunity, or what we call presidential immunity, is an immunity that exists to not only protect presidents, but protect Americans. And that was the arguments that we heard today. If you all of a sudden change an immunity that has been in place forever, that has been in place for very good reason, then how are presidents to protect the country? How are presidents to speak to the press and address the nation when they're afraid of defamation in civil claims, when they're afraid of criminal charges for having military take action against our enemies? It is hypothetical after hypothetical of extreme situations that are not the current situation. That's what I heard today. And I think our counsel did a great job of presenting what has already been established law. Presidents have to perform in their duties with absolute immunity from claims, because while they are sitting in president, Martha, it is not just, and I want to explain this in plain English, I always try and do that for non-lawyers, it is not just acts within his employment as the sole member of the executive branch. It is also for acts in the outer perimeter. It is for decisions he has to have discretion to make. If you have no discretion, then why are you elected as the president of the United States? That is the bottom line. The president was the president. He should be afforded immunity. And frankly, if the D.C. court does not make that decision, that would be mind-boggling to me.
The D.C. courts, there were lower courts that affirmed, I think, this Colorado State Supreme Court. The lower courts affirmed the special counsel's view of immunity. Okay, the Supreme Court is not influenced by politics. You could say, well, they're conservatives. But the liberal justices sided with the conservatives against the Colorado Supreme Court. So there goes the bias against Democrats in the Supreme Court. They don't like the Supreme Court because it's the only institution in the country that isn't influenced by media, by government. It's independent of influence from the traditional advantages that Democrats have. And so they're going to look at purely constitutional issues with Trump. He's allowed to perform a speech. If they didn't like his speech, and if criminal activity took place after his speech that had literally nothing to do with what he said, that's not his fault. I mean, it's like you had billions in property damage all throughout that summer. I mean, you had Clinton with top secret intelligence on private servers for 4 years. You had Biden with classified data in his garage. I mean, there are things that Democrats get away with that Trump would never get away with. Everything that they've done is infinitely worse than anything Trump has done. Then, to make it relative, they accuse Trump of things he didn't do. Oh, well, he was a Kremlin operative. Oh, well, he tried to foment a rebellion. None of it's true. If you just draw a T-chart and you just look, you just one side the things that Democrats get away with, and another side the things they accuse Trump of, it's not even a comparison.
To be honest.
So how long, tell me about the time frame, because obviously all of this is layered in an election year. This will likely go to the Supreme Court, and their decision is likely to have bearing on a number of these cases. So what do you expect in terms of timing, and do you think it's going to be delayed, and for how long?
Well, let's not be twisted on why we have a timing issue. There really isn't a timing issue. The only issue is the one that the Democrats have created because they're concerned about losing in 2024. So they've created this epic proportion of rush. It's a consistent rush. It's putting pressure on the Supreme Court. It's putting pressure on these circuit courts to rush to decisions because they create a sense of urgency that frankly does not exist.
Exactly. Democrats want desperately to imprison him. They're not going to get that. Kim G. Droney, thank you so very much. Mr. Goodman, thanks for the good news. Many blessings from a fellow American. Thank you, Kim G. Droney. Thank you so very, very much. Jeanette, thank you. Jeanette Seymour. Paul Bartlett to my super chat. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so very much as always. Kim G. Droney, thank you. Jeanette Seymour, thank you. God bless you all. And I appreciate your support and your kind words, everybody. Thank you so very much. God bless you. Be here on November 5th. It's going to be a beautiful, November 5th, 6th, 7th. However long it takes, Trump's going to, it'll be a landslide, I think, but it'll be amazing. Trump will regain the Oval Office, God willing, thank God. And he will help get this country back on track. It's been an unmitigated disaster with our current president, mashed potato brains. And again, Hillary Clinton, I will be like 5 for 5 on things that I've said this election cycle if Hillary replaces Biden. And I think she will. I've been saying that forever, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for your kind words as well. Kim G. Droney, thank you.
But for the fact that they are losing in the polls. So we are looking at this hectic rush. However, if you look at the decision with Jack Smith in the Supreme Court recently, they are calling them out on it. The rush to ruin an election is not, frankly, a rush at all. It is an urgent election interference claim that they've all colluded to do, in my opinion, and I've seen it time and time again. Presidential immunity is a slam dunk argument. If this case is not decided the way I think, frankly, the law states it should be, then yes, it will go to the Supreme Court. They will probably have to rush a decision because I'm sure prosecutors that we've seen that are Soros-backed will rush it. It's unfair, frankly, to the Supreme Court that they're being put in this position, but the law is very clear, and I think it's an easy decision to make.
All right, talk to me a little bit about the situation in Georgia and the revelation.
So this is Trump's legal team, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. I'd like to make some comments on behalf of President Trump. First of all, this was a momentous day. This is the first time in our nation's history.
This is Trump's legal team, and the reason that Democrats aren't able to imprison Trump is that he did not commit a crime. They accuse him of things that they view to be crimes through the prism and lenses of liberal sensibilities. None of the things that he did were actual crimes. On the contrary, when they say, well, Trump, he said, Madam Secretary should be locked up. Yeah, she had private servers with top secret intelligence on them for 4 years. That is the epitome of a cybersecurity nightmare. You couldn't even have private servers if you worked at Starbucks or if you worked at Microsoft or if you worked anywhere. If you worked in any office, Merrill Lynch, whatever, it doesn't matter. Any industry, go and set up your own private server. You will be fired in 2 seconds. Then the Honorable James Comey says, well, no reasonable prosecutor would indict. That's how they say. And then with Biden, no court would really want to. When they don't want to indict, they look into the future and they say, no prosecutor would want to. With Trump, they say, well, he's guilty. So it's prosecutorial discretion. Democrats actually get away. And this is the thing. The difference between the cult is not the Trump supporter. The actual cult is the person who will vote for a human being who slurs his speech and mumbles incoherently and dodders and stumbles about. And a political party that cheated its own candidate in Bernie Sanders. A political party where one of the nominees had private servers for 4 years. And a political party where you have a laptop where 50 Intel... You think I would vote for Trump if he had a laptop where 50 Intel officials came out of nowhere and said, it's fine, it's nothing, it's the Kremlin. You think I'd vote for Trump if the Republican Party was saying that Democrats were influenced by the Kremlin? I wouldn't do that. Because I would be like, no, what are you trying? This is McCarthy era nonsense. But they love it. And then they say that anyone who votes for Trump is part of a cult. It's no, that's the opposite, actually. Trump is coherent. He speaks. He's hilarious. He speaks for 2 hours, 3 hours all the time. He makes one mistake. They're like, it's the same as Biden.
That a sitting president has decided to prosecute his major opponent who's leading in all the polls in the country. The issues that the court had to deal with today were momentous. Whether or not a president of the United States could be prosecuted for carrying out his responsibilities, doing his job as president. We can't have a country where every 4 years there's a cycle of political recrimination, where one administration attacks a prior administration when in fact that can.
And you better believe, because Trump will get in office, they will get indicted, and they'll say, he's a despot, he's an authoritarian. And then when they do it to Trump, it's about the rule of law. And then the institutions. Everything they claim to uphold or care about, they jettison whenever it's leveled at them.
Candidate is leading in the polls and will be the next president of the United States. As our legal team, as our appellate team made clear, that would be a disaster for our country. That would be a direct attack on democracy, and that cannot happen.
Don't buy another pair of glasses.
What was very significant today, and I'm sure you all caught it, is the special counsel conceded that if it was President Obama who was being prosecuted for a drone strike, then they'd have to consider immunity. But when it's not, when it's President Trump, then they're taking the position that there's no immunity for presidential acts that were required when a president is carrying out his job responsibilities. If we adopt what the special counsel wants, if we adopt what President Biden wants, then we open the Pandora's box to political prosecution after political prosecution after political prosecution. In fact, Joe Biden could be prosecuted for trying to stop this man from becoming the next president of the United States. We don't need political prosecutions, we need political process. I'd like to introduce President Trump.
Well, I want to thank you all, and we had a very momentous day in terms of what was learned and what they've conceded. They conceded two major points that were right in doing it. I don't think they had much of a choice, but they're very, very big, very powerful points. And I think we're doing very well. I think it's very unfair when a political opponent, is prosecuted by the DOJ, by Biden's DOJ. So they're losing in every poll. They're losing in almost every demographic. Numbers came out today that are really very mind-boggling if you happen to be Joe Biden. And I think they feel this is the way they're going to try and win. And that's not the way it goes. That'll be bedlam in the country. It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad precedent. As we said, it's the opening of a Pandora's box, and it's a very sad thing that's happened with this whole situation. When they talk about threat to democracy, that's your real threat to democracy. And I feel that as a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple. And if you don't, as an example, if this case were lost on immunity, and I did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, I'm working for the country. And I worked on very hard on voter fraud because we have to have free elections. We have to have strong voter. After, well, nothing has to do with after I left. It was during the time. And that was what they really focused on today during the appeal. And they concede that, and everybody concedes that. And if it's during the time, you have absolute immunity. So we'll see how it all works out. We have a great argument. We have an argument with, they conceded two major points today. In fact, I think it's probably a concession. You have to ask the lawyers, Todd, if you'd like to talk about it. But they conceded 2 points that I think were, by normal standards, if it weren't me, that would be the end of this case. But sometimes they look at me differently than they look upon others, and that's very bad for our country. You had a very big event yesterday, as you saw, in Georgia, where the district attorney is totally compromised. The case has to be dropped. They went after, I guess.
By the way, there's something called, and I'm being facetious, I'm joking, not really, but there's something called the Trump curse. And there have been like 10 or 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 people in the past 7 years that have had their lives upended, their skeletons shown to the world, who have tried to take down Trump. And at the end of the day, they've been fired, they've been humiliated, they've been, all of their skeletons, dirty laundry has been aired out. And it's like every time you try to take down Trump, the opposite takes place. The person who tries to harm Trump gets their skeletons or their dirty laundry aired out in the open. It's absolutely unbelievable.
I guess 18 or 20 people. They wanted to go after a lot of other people. They wanted to go after senators. She was out of her mind. Now it turns out that that case is totally compromised. In fact, they say she's in far more criminal liability than any of the people she's looking at. So I think that when you look at what happened where they pay a lawyer with absolutely no experience $700,000 who happens to be her lover or her boyfriend, and then they go on trips and vacations together, very expensive vacations together. And the reason they paid him so much because he was after me, because this way they can afford to pay him a lot more. It probably passes certain tests. And that's a very sad thing that happened in Georgia. And I would imagine that case is going to be dropped. Every legal analyst that I've spoken to, every legal analyst that I've read have said that case is so compromised now it has to be dropped. Very good people were very badly hurt by that case. It's a shame. Very good people. People did nothing wrong. They did nothing different than what Democrats have been doing for years and years and years, whether it's slates or anything else that you're talking about. But they were very hurt, and it turns out that she profited tremendously on that case. It's illegal. What she did is illegal. So we'll let the state handle that. But what a sad situation it is. I want to thank everybody for the fairness. We've been covered very fairly. Most people agree that we're entitled as a president to immunity. If you didn't have immunity, as an example, Joe Biden with the prosecutor, we're not going to give you $1 billion unless you get rid of the prosecutor that's after the company or his son or whoever it is they're after. But he wanted that prosecutor gone, and he's on tape saying it. Or you could say the horrible job he's done at the border, where our country is being prosecuted for that. So you can't have a president without immunity. You have to have, as a president, you have to be able to do your job. But if this didn't work out, if I wasn't given immunity, then other presidents, when we talked about today, President Obama with the drone strikes, which were very bad. And the other thing is, I did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. The investigation of the election, which was a rigged election, everybody knows it, and most of the information, as you know, we'll give you some of the findings that just came out. But all of that information, as you know, was gotten from mostly government sources, government tapes, government files, and government stats. So it's very sad when something like that happens.
So, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to have some really, really, really huge victories very soon. Could be tomorrow, could be later, it wouldn't be tonight, but could be tomorrow, this week, this Friday, could be next week, who knows? Democrats are going to continue to try to disparage and demean the Supreme Court because it's the only institution in this country that isn't influenced by Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert and Washington Post and the New York Times and Hollywood and social media algorithms and 50 or 60 publications all in the tank for the Democratic Party. Democrats have a public relations monster. And it's like you have a situation where they influence lower courts, they influence the Department of Justice, they influence public opinion, but the Supreme Court is going to look at constitutional issues. Democrats are trying to rewrite the Constitution. You can't do that just to imprison Trump on things he didn't do. You can't accuse Trump of 34 felony counts if there's no jurisdiction. The state of New York has no right to level a federal statute at Trump without the FEC involved. And all I can tell you, Rob, thank you. All I can tell you is, ladies and gentlemen, circle all of November on your calendar. It's going to be a beautiful month in the history of this country. Donald Trump will win in November, ladies and gentlemen. And I think Hillary Clinton is going to replace our current president, mashed potato. I really do. And I've been telling you that for a long time. And when it does, you know what? Tell people I've been telling you forever. But ladies and gentlemen, I told you about the unanimous Supreme Court decision overturning the Colorado ban. I told you about the immunity victory he's going to get. The victory overturning an absurd, unconstitutional, guilty verdict. I think that Hillary is going to replace our current president, Biden, and I think that Trump's going to win. He'll very likely win in a landslide. Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you. Be here, obviously, November 5th and beyond. We're on our way to 300,000 subscribers even before November 5th. And that's because if you're in Australia, if you're in Canada, UK, New Zealand, if you're in the Philippines, Korea, anywhere around the world, Nigeria, tell your friends about this channel. Because the YouTube actually really loves international viewers. So tell your friends in Ireland, tell your friends, ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe, and thank you for your support. God bless you all. Paul.